Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast, where we talk to foresters about how they are using digital technologies in their day-to-day forestry work. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast. Today, I'm pleased to be speaking with Pete Watts from Indufor. Pete, how are you doing?
Hey, good, Kevin. Hey, how's things with you?
Not too bad. We were just saying earlier, comparing temperatures. So I'm 42 degrees Celsius with the Humidex. I think you said 10 degrees Celsius?
10 today. Yeah, not bad. Probably getting into the 16s, I think, high 16s.
Yeah, high 16s, nice weather. And for the listeners who can't see us, I'm in a t-shirt and Pete's in this kind of not thick sweater, but sweater. So it's kind of funny just comparing, contrasting. But Pete, what time is it? And you're in Auckland, right?
And it just gone 8:30 in the morning here on Wednesday. So we're a day ahead of you.
Okay, yeah. So we're 4:30-ish time frame. So yeah, a day ahead. So thanks for so much for joining from all the way around the world. I'm amazed this Zoom thing still works. Truthfully, I was worried because we hadn't gone that far overseas quite yet with the podcast. So this was a test to go down to Auckland, New Zealand, and see this would work. But it's working magically. So I'm just amazed.
Good. There's a bit of a challenge to find a good spot time.
Yes. That's one thing I've realized in my Calendly booking system. It's biased to North America. So I'm glad we were able to figure that out, but I'll have to think about that for future bookings with other people. So as with any of these podcasts, informal conversation, some of our listeners who've heard other ones know it. It's just a conversation going back and forth. And so this one I'm really excited about because I've known you for several years. I was thinking back, I'm like, oh God, Pete and I are going to date ourselves. And because in my mind, I still think back to our PhD days as if it was yesterday, and it's not. But maybe to start things off, how about you introduce who you are and how you got into forestry, I guess.
Yeah, okay. So I'm actually second generation forester. So my dad was a forester. And actually, like most sons, I was going flat out trying to find something else to do because I didn't want to do what my dad did. But I ended up drifting back to it. So he was what we call a farm forester. So he would go out to farmers and advise on plantings and manage woodlots. So I used to spend a lot of my younger years trawling through forests, actually being the guinea pig guy who runs out and puts the tape out, measures everything, and some pretty cool locations in New Zealand. So it was always good to get outside and in the outdoors. And then the first degree I did was agriculture. So true to form, didn't want to do what my dad did. I did that, but then realised it's pretty hard to get into if you can't own a farm. So that was the way I found my way back to forestry, did a forestry degree, and then spent 3 years as an operational forester. So I was lucky enough to be posted up into Asia. So I worked in Laos for 3 years on plantations. And at that stage, it sort of became a bit more interesting. I thought, I'd like to specialise into remote sensing. So I popped off and did a master's first and then a PhD in the UK in forest remote sensing. And that's really where I started to get a bit of a passion for this. So it was more about really the operational forestry stuff was about, okay, how can we make more of data sets? A good case in point would be Laos, where we were told to or advised to establish 50,000 hectares of plantations, but we had no idea where we could actually put them. We had Russian aerial photography from the 1960s. Satellite data was still really expensive, but it was one of the only options to look at.
Right.
So started to get into that and just, I thought, oh, wow, this is me. So again, at Durham, I ended up actually doing more of an operational PhD. So it was using LiDAR and time series data to basically improve informational forest descriptions. And that was really good because working with the Forestry Commission and Swedish Border Forestry on a joint project. And my job really was actually as a tech transfer guy because I understood the forestry and was quickly catching up on the technical remote sensing stuff. So trying to relate that back to foresters on the ground. One of the Forestry Commission areas that we're working was in Scotland, so the accents were really hard to understand. so I had to put everything in writing. So
I'm sure some of our listeners are listening right now, chuckling, going like, okay, gotcha with you.
They go, what is this turkey talking about? And so yeah, that was good fun. But came out of that and headed back to New Zealand in 2005 and started work really building on what I'd learned at university and also from practical forestry sense. It was only me to start with, but now we've got a team of eight guys working alongside, pretty talented.
Yeah. So how did you pick Durham? Like, Kiwi, I always joke, you take a Canadian, throw them into New Zealand, you get a Kiwi, you take a Kiwi, throw them in Canada, you have a Canadian. Like, having visited, we connected it's again, like, is it 5 years ago we connected at Forest Tech event?
Forest Tech.
So quite a long time ago, but when I visited, we were down in Auckland, Rotorua, I was just like, man, it's literally like Kiwis, Canadians, the same attitude, chill, accepting and all that jazz. But what made you choose New Zealand to go to Durham in the UK of all places? Was there a special connection or someone you knew, or you just wanted to go to the UK?
There's always a girl involved, so that's probably where it's that's the total answer to the question, to be honest. But no, I'd come to the end of my tenure in Laos, and I was basically told that the project no longer needed consulting, so I was working for a consulting firm at the time. But I didn't want to go back to New Zealand. I was still have a travel bug, and also wanted to further look at educational opportunities. So I looked. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, had got a job in Durham. So I was looking for opportunities to do remote sensing, and ended up actually doing a taught masters with a guy called Professor Danny Donoghue, who we still work together today. So that relationship goes back some 15 years. Amazing. And then it really is a taught master, so you paid for that. So that wasn't cheap, but out of that, as you know, it actually gives you an entry or a ticket to something else. So once you've got that, it's easier to get work. Right. And it so happened that this project came up. It was a 5-year project. It was EU funded, and it was called Forest Safe. So you might know the Forest Sat conference program that came out of that project.
Yeah. Okay.
And they said, okay, so your staff, you can do your PhD for free, which was pretty cool. And they said the only downside is that we've only got 3 years left on the project, so you have to finish the thing in 3 years.
No pressure at all.
And by the way, you're working at the same time. So I was a research associate, but that wasn't hard because Danny's such a good guy. We said, just structure all the field work around answering these questions, write them up, and off you go. Yeah. So we had LiDAR, we had time series satellite data to analyse, looking at terrestrial laser scanning, which is one of the first. At that time, it was only used in quarries, but we stuck it in the forest to see what it could do.
Yeah.
Wrote that up, and that's kind of where it sort of ended up being. And then, like I say, we continued that relationship with Danny. So we one of the bigger projects I've had since leaving university is doing forest change mapping for Guyana. So we grabbed the Durham guys to be the independent auditors of the mapping that the Forestry Commission does in Guyana. So
maybe explain to our listeners and myself, because I know I've chatted with you about it. It's related to I believe the UN Red Plus carbon audit, but maybe again not in my wheelhouse. That's why I love talking with you, because the stuff you guys do often like aside from the remote sensing, it's not my wheelhouse. So I love learning from that. But maybe for our listeners, walk us through what's happening in Guyana, context. I assume it's don't cut the trees basically, and there's a carbon exchange. There's things happening, but maybe walk us through, just give us a bigger picture on what's happening there. Maybe some of the technologies, right, and some of the challenges you faced then versus now, because I know you're heavy in the RS-EO space now.
Yeah. So that was it was interesting because even though I was lucky I did my PhD in time series data analysis, not just LiDAR, because at that time LiDAR was taking a while to come along. But when Guyana turned up, it was an interesting opportunity because they're one of the first countries. So this is Guyana in South America, not Ghana in Africa.
I was going to ask.
So everybody gets that wrong with my accent and go, oh, that's cool to be in Africa. So they came and asked, actually, because I'd met the head of planning again, a very astute person, Pradeepa, she said, okay, we've got this opportunity with Norway. We're called a red early mover. And I said, oh, that's cool. What's an early mover? And she said, well, the president at this point in time is really keen to preserve Guyana's natural forest. So it's rainforest, and it backs into the Amazon. So it's a country that's got 85% forest cover. It's got a really small population of 1 million people, mostly along the coastal fringe, and hardly any infrastructure on the interior. So it's, if you go into the forest, you can drive a road and walk, I don't know, 10 minutes, and you really are in the Amazon. Wow. So that's pretty cool. So they signed up a bilateral agreement. So this is before, I guess, the UN RED program really came on with the Norwegians to conserve the forest. And the idea here was that if Guyana kept the deforestation rate low, so around about 12,000 hectares a year, they would get paid $250 million over the next 5 years.
Oh, so it's worth it. How much?
250 million.
Wow.
So at that point, it was about 10% of GDP.
Wow.
And so they said, okay, we've got, when we turned up, actually, this is 2009, so this is going back 10 years. We turned up and we didn't even have a country boundary. So we had to go to Lands and Survey and say, okay, so which side, they had a survey map, so I said, which side of the Corentyne River, which is on the border with Suriname, do you have? Which side does Suriname have? And so we reconstructed it from there. And we had such a horrendous timeline. We had to map, basically change from 1990, because it's 1990 is the baseline year, which you compare back to. So we had to come up with a forest, non-forest map. So what that consists of is, okay, what's all natural forest now? And what's non-forest, what's grassland, infrastructure, roads at this point in time. And so once you've got that, you have a baseline. So you have a forest mask, so to speak.
Right.
And you compare against that forest mask. At that time, it was every 5 years, up to 2009 was set as the baseline year. So we went about that. We had to do that in 3 months.
Wow.
So we flat tack spent my 40th birthday in Guyana because of that. So we were doing it.
I hope your wife was with you and your family was with you. Otherwise,
no. That's another story, but I haven't got time. So that was pretty good. We worked on a road system coming in and out, so that was good. But the neat thing about this is that the idea here is it was tech transfer again. So it's building on what I did during PhD. So so we wanted to set up a system that the Guyanese Forestry Commission could run on their own, and then support it. And so while they were gearing up, so the background of the analysts in Guyana was that they all had GIS experience but had no remote sensing experience. So that's what we were bringing to the party. Okay. Plus, we were also bringing the framework for monitoring. So the idea with this is that you have to monitor every hectare in Guyana for change. And if it changes, then basically you document it through time. And that builds you a really good baseline. So you actually know what historically the deforestation rate has been. Right. And then that works out to payday. So if you keep it below 12,000 hectares, you get paid. If you exceed that, they started discounting. So they take 50% off. So whilst it's interesting because you actually start from nothing. So where I go back to the start was, okay, we delineated the boundary of the country. We started from nothing, built it to something. And now that in the old days is quite funny because it used to be Landsat based. So your Landsat's 30-meter resolution. Yep. United States Geological Survey has the data sets, Sioux Falls. And we would basically ask them to send us a hard drive of satellite data. They'd send a hard disk of satellite data back to the 1990s. So all the scenes that ever been downlinked from a ground station, some from Brazil ground station in Curitiba, and then also US. We'd get all that stuffed onto a hard drive, posted down, and then loaded onto the desktops and start the analysis. And that is very manual. It's totally a manual process. And we were going, okay, so we've got analysts who've got GIS experience, no remote sensing experience. We just set up a whole lot of processes that let them use, at that time, ArcGIS to map it and grid it up the country, and they'd work sequentially through it, documenting change. So once you had that forest on forest mask, you were looking for change within the forest and documenting that every year. Now, to get the money, you had to be past the audit. So you had another audit team come in over the top of that at the end of each year and pull the whole thing to bits. So you had to have standard operating procedures written. You had to have the analysts. So we weren't in the room. We were with the consultants. So we get taken out of the room, and the analysts have to stand on their own 2 feet and show what they're doing, and show that they can do it in a repetitive way. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I remember talking with you in the past about that. You guys developed some novel algorithms, right, to process that change. Like, this isn't just create a basic NDVI and stuff. Like, you guys actually, if I remember correctly, last time we connected down in New Zealand, you guys had some magic, and you've continually evolved some of it, but started from there. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So it was really good because Guyana is probably one of the cloudiest countries in the world. And as everybody knows, using optical data, it's a super big challenge to do any cloud clearing. So you either have 2 options here. You either find a cloud-free image or a portion of image, and you just look at heaps of imagery. So you can imagine that's a huge data stack where you're just looking at the same piece of dirt on the ground, but sifting through all the images to find the one that can help you. And some maybe cloud on one part and cloud-free on another part. So you've got lots of data to look at. That's one way to do it. What we've ended up moving to was using cloud-based processes. So we went away from the desktop and said, okay, all the imagery now is stored in the cloud by a number of different agencies, which is really good. So that gives you automatic access to the historical archive for Landsat going back to 1972. And then everything that's ever come on that's it's non-commercial. So sensors like Sentinel-2 have been a real big influence, I think, in terms of being able to get repeatable data. So where Landsat had a repeat visit over the same location every 16 days, still a problem. We didn't have enough cloud-free data. So when Sentinel came along, has a repeat visit with 2 satellites in orbit of 5 days. It makes a massive difference. And then you've got radar satellites, which you can slot in as well. So we went about developing in the cloud. So that was good, because that is the platform we're using is Google Earth Engine. Okay. So we popped along to Google's headquarters and had a chat to them, said, okay, we've got this project. Can we use the platform for this? And they said, yep, that fits under the mandated Geo for Good. Off you go. So we developed everything in that platform. So it basically has a scripting environment, which everybody sees. So they run the scripts, they keep the code. So the Forest Commission's got the code, and we just develop around new algorithms, new data sets as they come in. And one of the big ones here is actually the cloud clearing algorithms. So you can leverage off the community there. So there's some really good cloud clearing algorithms that you can use from ESA's developed. And that's all in Earth Engine. And just keep ticking along and then developing. And the good thing about it is that it's you can customize it. So we can customize that interface to whatever Forest Commission requires. So
for some of our listeners out there who are kind of playing into the cloud, like when we look at forestry market research, largely actually across the globe, it's split 50. I was surprised 50% on who's still on-prem versus who's gone to the cloud. And so with Google Earth Engine, was that choice really because given the nature of the work that there wouldn't be a charge associated with GCE, like thinking of Azure, AWS, DigitalOcean, all sorts of different things. For some of our listeners who are trying to pick what they should use, it can be confusing. So thinking with your experience with Google Cloud Engine, what was it really? Because aside from scalability and whatnot, was there a cost? Like, did you have to pay for those resources, or because it was part of that special program, it was largely a no-brainer because you could access the infrastructure for free? Or maybe share some thoughts on how you got there. Then are you still happy with that, or what you see? Are there any advantages of GC over some of the other public cloud offerings today?
Well, I think it's an evolving space very quickly. I mean, you've seen the planetary computer that Microsoft's launching. Going back to Google Cloud, sort of Earth Engine, we were introduced to that by actually FAO. So a chap called Eric Lindquist, which you know. I think you know Eric quite well too. So Eric was showing us some of the scripts, because what we were, and it was really necessity based for us, because we don't want first hard drives from USGS every year. We need a way to methodically store this data If we have to put it onto our own service, then it's really redundant data, so it's actually a cost. And the other thing actually in Guyana is we have blackouts, so the power goes off. Because current point in time, they run diesel generators to generate the power for the country. So they don't have hydro, they don't have thermal, they don't have anything like that. So we would be trucking along using desktop software. Envy was a software of choice. And suddenly the power goes off. We go, oh, crap, start again. Somewhere so we're looking really for an environment. It could have been, and ESA was still getting their ducks in a row. So we were looking for an environment that had the data. That was the first consideration. And then we were looking for an environment where we could take, because a lot of the algorithms are not new. They actually exist in desktop packages, but you take those algorithms and you put them in the cloud and you adapt them. And the speed of adaptation is cool because you've got the cloud processing. So your listeners will know, but the cloud processing is basically stringing a whole lot of computers together. So the results are super fast, instantaneous, fast load, fast process. And from that point, you're starting to generate information from the satellite data. So those are really the key things we're looking for. And then we just wanted to round it out. We didn't want to take anything for free. So that's why we went and had a chat with Google and said, if we put a bit of effort into this, so we've been programming in that environment for probably 4 years now.
Okay.
Are we okay to keep doing that? You're not going to, I know this is that because Google Earth Engine is really for non-commercial use and educational use.
That's right.
And they are migrating to a commercial offering, but that's still discussions and might take a while to work out.
Right.
Because in a sense, the thing you would notice actually is that what's really pushed this area forward is the availability of data and speed of processing.
Yep.
And it's probably the next thing is actually the communication materials that you generate and the products you generate from doing both those things. So dashboards, for example, making life easy for people because people are just bombarded with information at the moment.
Well, we've talked to other people and some comments like on this podcast, and they said, some people have said there's almost too much data out there that, how do you make sense of it all? And I think I've always had this thesis, data's data, and we hear, data's the new oil, blah, blah, blah. But it's the information product that's really of interest to drive that decision or solve a problem versus how much data is there actually there. And I like the point about the cloud in the sense of, like, often when I talk to people, there's always jargon, right? Like we can scale out in the cloud, to your point, start stringing all these VMs, virtual machines together, or scale up, like actually, take each one of these VMs, add more memory or more CPU processing and stuff. So it's this magical world, but it's moving so quickly, like compared to when you and I were doing our PhD, it's like, ASCII text files or the Rage DVDs and spindles them and stuff. Like times have completely changed on that front. So very cool work there. And I know for our listeners, if you're not in the EO space, remote sensing, there is jargon at play, ESA, European Space Agency. Pete and I are just going with the flow. There's our own nomenclature and jargon there. But I guess thinking of that work, like, so with Indufor, you're the head of resource monitoring in the New Zealand office. How many are you in the New Zealand office?
So we're actually, Indufor New Zealand is interesting because we're a forest consulting company, and so is Indufor Group really, but it's in the New Zealand office we're split pretty much in the middle. So we got forest valuation due diligence. So if you're selling a forest asset or buying a forest asset, it's a big one. Usually talk to us about the transaction. So we're about describing the forest in terms of its wood flow capabilities, financials, and areas. And that's the area that's where we sort of slot in. So my group is eight of that number. So eight of the 19. And then within my group, it's really interesting because I think what you're seeing is that the digital age is starting to take over. So the skill sets that you need now, if you hark back to when you did your PhD, are quite different. So whereas before you could say, okay, if I did my PhD again, I would probably have to change the way I did it. You need to be skilled in data processing, programming, web development, all these sort of things, and data science. So it's a really fast moving environment where my team is 3 foresters, maths degree, computer programming, computer science, geography, and coastal geomorphology.
Wow.
So, yeah, and forestry is the minority in that group.
Yeah.
So you can take whatever you like. Actually, you can take remote sense data and apply it across a lot of different disciplines. It's just really how you get information. So we would probably the forest intelligence side of for us is the other part when we're not doing monitoring deforestation in Guyana. We're doing adding other values to either the forestry valuation team or looking at assets in a different way.
Yeah.
So using LiDAR, EO data, deep learning for tree detection, that sort of thing, precision forestry. So all those sort of elements come into play.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Like, because I know looking at the website Indufor, the Australia, Finland, New Zealand, USA. So obviously you're and on the New Zealand side, I know there's the business side is broken down into resource monitoring and generating resource insight, national scale monitoring and delivery platform. And I know even your website, it says forest and intelligence. So you're kind of like in the thick of things in terms of who's who in the zoo and what's happening. And there's a lot, like when we look at the market right now, there's a lot of venture dollars coming into the Earth observation space and all sorts of things that are happening. But given your experience and the technologies you use, can you maybe share with the listeners what used to be the go-to suite of technologies, and to your comment that even your team, you're seeing that skill set needing to change, and given all the changes, what's that new set of things like Landsat is great program, it's continuing. You've mentioned Sentinel, and there's all you got the planets of the world, you got all sorts of stuff, the commercial eye, you got Capella with the radar side of things. It's just crazy, there's just so much. And what are you seeing now from a technology? What gets Pete Watts and his team excited about remote sensing today compared to maybe even as little as a year or 2 years ago, and what you're seeing in the market in trends?
So I think the trends is that you see more satellites in space, which is a good thing. And what that means is actually the price drops. So whereas before it used to be quite expensive to get, say, a world view scene, which is an XR platform, or PlanetScope, or even SkySat, which is also Planet. Those prices are dropping and the coverage is improving. So the resolution improves, the coverage improves, the price drops. It becomes a more, I guess, compelling argument to actually use it in your more day-to-day use. And then I think the software packages are done well. So the Arches and the QGIS are doing well with a certain segment of the market is just, okay, visual. We don't need to do any analytics. We just want to have a look at what the forest status at the moment. So heads up digitizing, where you bring in the image and you map around the edges or the boundaries, is probably quite a big part of that market. So we see that evolving, and that's interesting. To say the venture capital impact is the marketing aspect of that. So there's massive marketing effort.
Yes.
Around, hey, our data's here, it's daily, it's awesome, use it. And people get that message, and it's almost the fear of missing out if you're not on that bandwagon a little bit.
Yeah.
So we step back a bit from that. We go, okay, we're data agnostic. We don't particularly subscribe to any particular company like the Maxars and Planet. We use their data, we're data users, but we try and apply their data in a way that can add value. That's really where we're trying to get to. And so in saying that, what we've sort of come up with is sort of a landscape monitoring approach, where if you step back and you look at things from a wide scale, you go, okay, well, I'm more screening for issues or alerts. So I might use Sentinel for that. And the time series element, that's the real thing. That's one thing that's quite novel, is the analysis of time series data now. So just looking at the same area, but setting it up in a way that you can generate alerts if anything change, which is quite a transferable product. So once you've got the alert, you no longer, if you're subscribing to someone who's providing you daily imagery, you don't have to look at the whole set of daily imagery or this whole large areas. You actually just go to the place that's generated the alert. So it's more efficient way of using it. So getting a lot of those processes in train and showing the value. So I think that's one aspect. Second part would be around the deep learning. So not sure if you're too familiar with that, but it's really using high resolution data, moving away from traditional pixel-based classifiers to object-based classification. So you have an image, say, and you train the algorithm, so it's AI, to look for similar objects on the same image. So you have a training and testing set, bit of science in there. So you hold 30% back, and then to see how good you are at actually when you run the model to come out with the results. And that we've seen can be applied to a lot of different areas. So we're using it for survival mapping of UAV data, but then also realizing that UAVs are kind of hindered by battery life at this current point in time, and also line of sight. We stuck a camera on a Cessna, so a light aircraft, and that's flying near infrared band. So that's you got the red, green, and blue, which is true color, and you got near infrared, which is also picking up something different in the light spectrum, where it's picking up photosynthetic activity. So it's really good for identifying living and dead things, for example. Live things are really bright in near infrared. So using that technology on that platform, we can cover large areas pretty quick. So like 8,000 hectares a day. Continuous coverage, or going point to shoot mode where you just fly waypoints. So that's picking up the detail you need.
Yeah, so sounds like lots of like multi-platform technologies that you guys use. You're using the best, and so for our listeners, often this is one of my personal peeves. When people talk about AI, it's like this broad term, and I don't do AI, machine learning, and so really AI is our broad domain. Machine learning is a part of AI, and deep learning is a part of that machine learning space. But one of the things we often hear, and I'd be interested in knowing your thought, is these are only successful to the extent that you have massive volumes of training data. So when you say that's 70-30, and I know looking at on social, you recently did some work with Scion, with some mapping with deep learning. So maybe first question there is true or false, you need a truckload of data to really make this work, or is that a myth? And then maybe introduce who Scion is for our listeners, because I know what it is, having been down in your neck of the woods, but I know pretty much everyone else outside of your region probably won't. And then tell us how you applied maybe those deep learning things and what you learned from that.
Yeah, I think you are correct. You do need training data. So it just depends a little bit how complex the environment is. So New Zealand, we're 99% radiata pine. So that's planting seedlings of the same species everywhere. And the spacings are very similar, and the regimes are quite similar. So you do have, once you know what a radiata pine looks like, you kind of, okay, we can build a tree model for that. The complexity comes with that is when it's maybe cut over, so someone's harvested it and then planted through it. It looks quite different to the model, or it's really crappy growth. You've got someone's come in and some died, some alive, some stunted. So if you build the training sets around that concept, it's a much simpler thing. So we do actually end up at the moment build a training set for everything we get. We haven't got to the generic model yet, so that's a work in progress. But I think it's coming along, and there's a lot of interest in it. And the cool thing would be is if you got more collaboration, where people actually are busy annotating, because that's what it is, basically drawing, and then you can share those annotations across and apply them in the models. And the way the models are applied, you might know, the listeners might know, there's a few available in sort of the larger software packages like ArcGIS, but we've gone and actually built it from scratch. So we've taken open source code and running it on a Linux machine. And the main reason to do that is it scales. So you don't get caught up with computational overhead on those packages, because they are big beasts. Like good programs, but they take a lot of computer power to run. So we run it on a Linux machine, feed it in, it breaks it up into chunks, and we've got a couple of clever guys who've worked out the process end to end with the help of Scion. So Scion is New Zealand Forest Research, based in Rotorua and Christchurch. So we've linked in with their geomatics team, and they're actually really, really good. So the linkage for us really is to take some of their science and then make it operational. And the feedback loop on that, so it's not all sitting there just cashing dollars in. The feedback loop is that there's always research to be done once you commercialize something. which is what we've done in Guyana as well. Basically, we always had an operational R&D approach. So we know to keep things moving ahead and keeping abreast of actually changes in technology and algorithms. So you still have to put quite a lot of effort into just keeping code bases updated and looking for new algorithms. Same thing with deep learning. Same idea.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you said that, because when you're talking about Sion, right away in my mind, as I connected the dots in my head, your journey, it's like there's definitely that tech transfer, that knowledge transfer theme throughout a lot of your career in terms of the projects, and Sion's another example when you say operationalizing the research and marrying the best minds together, which we know is sometimes easier said than done per se. So thinking of like an average forester then, it's deep learning out of their wheelhouse. Would you, because you mentioned even with your team, the skill set has changed. And I agree completely. Like there's times I go back and fish my PhD dissertation. I think it's in the closet, in all honesty. I don't know where yours is, but I pull it out and I scan it. And there's times I kind of laugh and go like, I cannot believe I got a PhD degree for this, thinking back to the things we're working on now. I don't know if you have that same experience, but some of these new technologies, a lot of digital foresters are interested to explore in-house. What's your suggestion to them on how to get started? Is it really buying a commercial package and doing that? Is it going, the R route? Is it going like there's lots of Python libraries out there in that whole data science world? What's your suggestion to a forester who's saying, I really want to get into this deep learning world and figure things out? Because on our side, what we're seeing often is that if you run it through a machine learning, you got pretty good results. You run it through a deep learning, you're going to boost results by 5 to 10% per se. But what's your suggestion to a listener who's like, I want to get into this? Where would you say they should start?
Well, I think there's a lot of stuff online. It's always probably too much, but even
that's Pete's polite way of saying, Kev, that's called Google. Just Google it and the problem solved. Thank you.
If you've got an appetite for it, then I think I would go through some of the better credible packages. So there's a lot of stuff in R, and there's a lot of stuff in I guess the deep learning. What we found is to be honest, I don't touch it, right? So I am the tech transfer guy, because I understand what the guys are doing in terms of the outputs, but I don't go near what the code is. So it's almost like a specialism. So that's what I'm informing our team. We've made that conscious decision where we've got guys who are really super tech, really good at that, and just sometimes they need a bit of grey haired input. So you go. Because to be all honesty, actually, things have an interesting cycle where people come back and go, this is the latest and greatest, and you go, but we tried that 10 years ago. Similar approach, using similar algorithms doesn't really work for these reasons. And you go at it this way. And an example of that would be, we're going to go and use deep learning to identify all the single trees in the forest at age 15, so the canopy's closed. And you go, no, that won't work. Why? Because the crowns are coalesced and you can't tell one tree from the other. It's pointless. Yeah.
But if I have enough training data, Pete, if I have enough training data, it'll know, right? It's got to work.
No, but you do believe the model, right? So everybody loves maps, and they believe maps, and they go, this is the answer. And you go, nah. Just happens that you fluke the same number of stems per hectare. So going back to your question, I think if you're really keen on this stuff, get on Google, and work out what elements you're really interested in, because it's such a wide and broad area. You can go maybe looking at some demo data sets that are available in some of the packages is a good way to go to get an idea of what you're actually going to do. But then if you need to understand the nuts and bolts of the models, because models are changing all the time as well. So there's ones that just do bounding boxes on objects, and there's ones that segment crowns. They're quite different models, and different ways to actually operate. So the guys tell me.
Well, that's the thing. Once you Google it, TensorFlow comes up, YOLO 3 on, like, they make it sound like, it's so easy, you just go ahead and do it. But as we know, sometimes there's more, there's an equal amount of art and science at play. So interesting conversation with you, because we're more on the remote sensing side. Well, not more on it, but different view, because as I've talked with other people on this podcast, some feedback I get is, it's just like So just commercial, operational forestry, there's other aspects of forestry you don't talk about. So this is a cool one because it's kind of touching on different aspects of Earth observation and monitoring for different things. But also, tell me about New Zealand, commercial forestry in New Zealand. What's happening? What are you seeing on the ground? Because you guys are a beautiful island. So with COVID-19, I think your prime minister just kind of shut all the borders. And when things were good, you and the Australians made a little bubble, and then now it's kind of closed. I think you guys are in a lockdown. Are you guys in a lockdown right now?
Yeah, we're first week of 2 weeks now for us, which I think will slide into 6. But,
okay. And so you mentioned Radiata Pine. Like, again, I remember down Rotorua going for a hike. I can't remember that. There's a park just close to the hotel we were at.
Near the Distinction. There's a redwood grove there.
Yes, so that's it. Yeah, beautiful, amazing. It's spent hours walking there. But maybe for our listeners, tell us what you're seeing on the ground with forestry in New Zealand and the work, the geospatial work you're doing. You mentioned drones, et cetera, and EO, GIS. Is there a set stack that you're seeing most New Zealand forestry companies, your clients and customers, using? Like, as an example, are drones kind of everyday tools now in New Zealand? Granted, you mentioned, you still have line of sight constraints. In Canada, I think we're not over that, but I know there's some beyond line of sight projects that have gone. But maybe for our listeners, school us on what forestry is like in New Zealand and how you're helping with technology.
Well, it was interesting because everybody, we start from the highest resolution, everybody's got a drone, and they fly it for a variety of reasons, and it's probably a perk of the job almost, I'd say. But, and there's always the software packages that go on behind that, so it's been used for anything from sort of just doing a recce, having a look, see whether anything's changed, or building DTMs, doing plot counts. Some of the more advanced companies are doing that. They're going hard out at trying to work out deep learning to get survival counts. So like a lot of forestry companies, you go, if you actually know where the location of a tree is, you know the location for life. So you can start to build tree level models rather than stand-based models.
Right.
So it's a real active area of research, which is crossing over into the operational use. So foresters are seeing that as, okay, if we can crack this one, we take a lot of boots off the ground, so we don't have to basically do a forest census at an early age and characterise the forest quite early, because our forests grow. Radiata Pine, we're harvesting that 25 years. And that's a variety of products you're pulling out of that. So if you're pruning, you've got peeler logs, which have got no knots in them because you're taking the branches off, or you've got saw logs and you're looking for small branches. And that majority of our timber actually is exported to China. So that's in log form, so not a lot of processing. So the get-go thing really is actually to grow trees as big and fast as you possibly can. That's what the objective is a lot of the time. And then LiDAR is actually, we're a little bit behind the rest of the world, but we've just had the governments funded 80% of the country to be flying LiDAR. So previously that's been forestry companies going out and dipping into their own pocket or collaborating with other companies to fly LiDAR and then generating information like digital terrain models, so service models for harvesting, roading.
So what's driving that though? Is it forestry or is it terrain, disaster insurance? What's pushing that forward?
I would say environmental monitoring, because you've got a lot of land that's really steep, and there's a lot more store put in trying to get our rivers back to swimmable and fishable. Is that a word? Fishable's a word.
Yeah.
So at the moment they're wadeable, which is not a great thing. So they recognise that there's a lot of sediment going into the rivers, and farming is obviously a big part of New Zealand as well. So there's a lot of also nutrient going into the rivers. And if you understand the topography and the terrain, then you've got ways to better understand, I think, how to manage it. So that's part of the driver. So good terrain data leads to a lot of good outcomes in terms of describing what you've got and better management. So as foresters, we benefit from that because we already know what you can do with LiDAR. It's just been a bit of a hindrance in terms of not being able to have it. So working with that, and then the interesting thing, some of the work we're doing Indufor actually with Sion again is looking at how you can update LiDAR using photogrammetric point clouds.
Yep.
So again, using the Cessna approach, where you get lots of photos with lots of overlap on them, you get viewpoints on the ground from different angles.
Yep.
And you build the point cloud from that. So once you've already got a really fantastic terrain model from LiDAR, you get the photogrametric point cloud from the aircraft. And that's the points that tell you the height of the vegetation above the ground. You can generate a number of interesting forestry metrics like timber volume, estimate DBH, diameter of breast height. So that, those sort of things, performance-based statistics are becoming more widely used, and they will become more widely used as the what we call provincial growth fund rolls out the LiDAR. It's all open source. That's the other cool thing. So even the point clouds are open source.
Okay, so it's in that open data. Yeah. So for our listeners thinking, when because I've only been on the North Island, not the South, but terrain is crazy. I know, like for our listeners, just go watch Lord of the Rings and you'll get a good sense of the crazy terrain in New Zealand. And I'm sure Pete's like, oh, really? It's like you're gonna bring that stereotype of New Zealand there per se. But it's interesting you mentioned the photogrammetric point cloud, because a lot of people we talk to, forestry companies, there's that what's the frequency, that refresh you're going to fly LiDAR because it's more costly, and you got the baseline now of terrain. And it's going to, I guess in your neck of the woods, you're more seismically active than maybe Canada, but in principle, once you've established that baseline, you can difference from the photogrammetric point cloud. And we've seen in the literature, a bit of loss in precision, but arguably whether that's make or break when you do the cost benefit, there's savings to realize there. Out of curiosity, the LiDAR you guys flying for the nation, usual linear mode stuff we're used to, or is it going into that single photon world or Geiger mode or something new, or is it's the usual stuff? And what point density, out of curiosity, for us, like what are they shooting? If it's terrain, are they nowadays sensors, you close your eyes compared to what we're used to back in our day, like you're at a high point density, right? But what flavor are they shooting for the country?
I think my understanding is not waveform, so it's discrete point, but and they're running it at least 4 points per square meter.
Okay.
So in most situations, we would get enough ground points to describe the terrain. Because at the moment, really, the best terrain models, unless you've already got LiDAR, are usually from the shuttle topography mission.
Yes, RTM,
which is really quite dated. So 25 meter data, and that has really interesting outcomes. If you try and do any sort of modeling of terrain with it, you miss a lot, and that's the cost of setting up ground-based versus hauler, and different configurations of haulers, which mean you're putting a tower up on the horizon and pulling timber to it. And if you don't describe the terrain properly, you just end up putting it in the wrong place.
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting to see a lot of countries recognizing data. In this case, like it's an infrastructure, it's a data infrastructure. You've collected it once, and it's cool that it's in that open data movement, because then everyone will benefit. I'm sure the ROI will be out the roof on that front, per se. So thinking as we're winding down, Pete, obviously broad background from your side. You've seen a lot of things, plugged into different things. I had not known there's a Laos start there, and kind of Laos not ready to go back to New Zealand, and the UK, and then you ended up back in New Zealand. So I guess the timing was right, or as I joke, we just got old and we reverted it back what was familiar to us, per se. But thinking of, let's say, trends, what are you the most excited about over the coming few years? Is there one forestry technology trend that you're really keeping your eye? I know you mentioned deep learning. Is that the one that really, from your seat, is that game changer? Given what you've said earlier, LiDAR, you and I dabbled with, eons. I say that jokingly ago, but there's a lot of us from a different vintage, as I call it. But what's that thing, that cool tech that you just feel is that next game changer for forestry?
Oh, I think there's probably a few different levels here. I do think the deep learning's going to keep improving, and people become familiar, I think, with it and know when to use it. So a lot of it actually is just understanding when it should be applied. So that's one thing. The other thing I think is the communication satellites. So we're probably different to Canada, but we've got large parts of the country which are don't have good Wi-Fi coverage.
We got a lot of 0G in Canada, my friend. You got to come visit. 0G's the rage in forestry in a lot of places. So
if you're trying to, like, it's funny actually, the telco companies will tell you they got 98% coverage, but they're talking about 98% coverage of the population, not the country. So, it's quite a nice feeling actually go out for the day in the forest and no one can call you. That's one benefit.
Yeah.
But it's in terms of having Internet of Things and those sort of sensors in the forest, you can imagine that you're starting to get to precision measurement like they do in agriculture. So if you're interested in the drivers of climate change, for example, you want to know temperature change, soil moisture, trying to understand that and those relationships with how your productivity is performing. Those sort of technologies will come to the fore. I think things like spaceborne LiDAR, so you would already know about the JEDI mission, which sits on the International Space Station. Pretty coarse, but pretty interesting. I mean, if that technology keeps evolving, then you'll have LiDAR from space, which is really, my mind actually, for anything that, if you're not doing change detection, you just want to do forest parameterization or measurement, then LiDAR is the go-to. And you can see that with the drone technology improving as well, with LiDARs on drones. Even the hover map idea, which is a LiDAR mounted on a drone in the forest, which is just zooming around, not running into trees, describing that. And as those battery power improves, you'll have a lot of those gadgets at your disposal. But then again, it sort of boils down to what level you need to monitor it, landscape or precision. So, and what we found actually is we did a project, it's not related to forestry, but we did a project with regional councils here where we were showing a range of monitoring tools. So it was a joint project with a number of different Crown Research Institutes who were specialists in, say, coastal monitoring or wetlands or sort of geomorphology, and we were doing the forestry bit. And we found that the main bottleneck to uptake was actually people getting hold of data and looking at it and being able to access it. So whilst the project was about developing tools for regional councils, it was only when you gave them the tool and they started looking at, say, satellite data and they could easily get a hold of it, they started to change their perception of the world. And that's the big thing. I mean, again, I think people are just bombarded with so much information that you don't know what's real, what's not. So if you get over that, I think better communication materials, that's what foresters could do well. I think it's just describe things that in common sense terms.
Yeah. Well, lots there, Pete. Definitely lots of technologies. You mentioned the hover map, right, coming from the mining space from Emesent there, and just lots of I saw a tweet somewhere where there's a Boston Dynamics dog, and then I think Huawei has a new robot dog that looks mean. But who knows what the world's going to be. And I think back to a Society of American Foresters conference I went to, and they had a speaker that was just kind of role playing what the future could look like. And it was kind of like, the Tesla Cybertruck pulls up and then the trunk opens and the drone right away launches to go do its recon of the block. And then meanwhile, there's this antenna that pops up for real-time connectivity, and the foresters is standing there. So boots still on the ground, I guess, but maybe different from that point of view. So lots there. It's going to be an exciting time into the future. So Pete, thinking of all this, if our listeners want to reach out to learn more about deep learning, all the cool work Indufor and your team's doing in monitoring and whatnot, how do they get hold of you? Website, Twitter, LinkedIn, email? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
I'd probably just go on the our website. So it's www.indufor.co.nz.
I love it. Dub. So to translate for our North America friends, triple W. I love talking with you, learning all these things. So I say that in jest. It's just cool. The little isms there going forward. Well, hey, my friend, thanks so much for spending the time to talk with me. As I said, wish is coming down to some of the events down in your neck of the worlds and connect over a beer again. It's been far too long.
Yeah, and I could.
Hopefully, the world, this pandemic gets over and we could all kind of hang out and reminisce in person per se. But thanks so much for your time. Wishing you be safe, wishing you all the best. And I look forward to seeing you in person over not too long from now.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. Thanks, Pete.
Cheers. See you later.